Okay, good day, everybody. Thank you for attending today's SAFOST webinar. My name is Tsetsa Baloyi. I'm the Communications Officer at SAFOST. I'm going to quickly give you the webinar housekeeping rules so we can enhance your experience on today's webinar. Please note that all opinions and statements are those of the individuals making the presentation and not necessarily the opinion or view of SAFOST. This webinar is recorded and will be available on the SAFOST website within the coming 7 days. For the best viewing of the presentation material, please click on Maximize in the upper right corner of the slide window, then Restore to return to normal view. Please turn off other applications that require internet connection to avoid slow transmission and blurry vision. Audio is transmitted over the computer, so please have your speakers or headphones on and volume turned up in order to hear. A telephone connection is not available for today's webinar. Questions should be submitted to the presenter during the presentation. Using the questions section at the right side of the screen, click on the drop-down arrow, type your question, and then submit. Please note that all questions will be answered at the end of each presentation. When typing your question, please refrain from using acronyms to allow the moderator to easily read your questions out. With all the regulations being said, I'm going to hand over to Lisa to introduce our speakers. Lisa, over to you.
Super, thank you, Tetsi. So we are very excited today to welcome you to the Cape Branch's webinar on food waste, an incredibly important topic in a country that's wasting 10 million tons of food and has many of its citizens going to bed hungry. We have a wonderfully diverse lineup of speakers today. We've got Andy du Plessis from FoodForward, Sibulela Ngeniswa from the CGCSA, and Dr Stefan Hayward from Innovative Research Solutions. And they all have different perspectives tackling food waste from a recovery, from a reducing, and from a valorisation of food waste. So I'm going to kick off with Andy du Plessis. Andy has been in the social development sector for more than 25 years. He actually led the Peninsula School Feeding Association for 15 of those years and was able to work very closely with the Department of Education, advocating for the introduction of more nutritious cooked meals and fruits and vegetables for lunch, as well as having 500,000 school children being fed a nutritious school breakfast. In 2013, Andy joined FoodForward SA, which is based on this unique model on food banking, which is around the recovery of edible surplus food from the supply chain to address food insecurity. And he's also introduced some very innovative programs, specifically digital technology for surplus food collections. He's a prolific speaker and writer, has had many articles published in the Mail and Guardian, Daily Maverick, etc. And so we really look forward to your chat today, Andy. Please, just a reminder, if you have any questions, pop them in the question box, and we'll be asking the speakers questions after each of their presentations. So over to you, Andy. Thank you. Look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Lisa and SAFOST, for the invitation and the opportunity to present to you. I'm going to go right into the presentation for the sake of time, and then I'll keep an eye out for any questions afterwards. So, surplus food recovery, it's quite an interesting topic, especially in our current context, and it's really good that we talk about this opportunity and the constraints in the current context that we are. So, as most of you know, attending this webinar, roughly 1/3 of all the food produced in South Africa goes to waste or goes to landfills, while more than 14 million people go hungry. This was a CSIR study in 2013, as well as Oxfam 2018 report regarding the 14 million people. Obviously, that context is quite different today, nearly a year after COVID-19, but more on that later. So the right to food is enshrined in our constitution, which really makes food a social justice issue and an equality issue. All people should have access to safe, healthy and nutritious food, And that's not the case across South Africa, in spite of the fact that South Africa has a net surplus of food. So some definitions to start with. Food loss is what occurs around the production, storage phases, distribution stages in the supply chain. And food waste refers to any food, good food, quality food, fit for human consumption, but is not consumed because it is discarded for a number of reasons. Many of you will be familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals that we're all trying to work towards. And SDG 1, 2, and 12 are most important to us as a food relief organization, especially 12.3 around the sustainable and responsible production of and consumption. So the food waste topic is one that is growing internationally, where people are starting to understand and ask the questions with regard to why do we have this situation. Even the United Nations has flagged a specific day, which they launched last year, the International Day of Awareness for Food Loss and Waste, which we really support, and it's late but certainly most welcome. So where in the supply chain do we have this problem of food loss and waste? Roughly 50% of the food loss takes place on the agri side, at the harvesting side. Another 45% around the processing, packaging, and retail side. And only about 5% of this waste occurs on the consumer side, or what we call the post-consumer side. So our efforts to divert food should really take place on the pre-consumer side. So in the agri side, in the production phases, manufacturing phases, and then also the retail phase prior to consumers purchasing that food. That's really where the thrust of our efforts need to be focused. Why is there surplus food? For a whole range of reasons, including overproduction, over-ordering, incorrectly labeled goods. Date labeling is quite a big issue, and certainly one that I think is being addressed by the CGCSA, the Department of Health, and others. Short-dated products, damaged goods, and errors throughout the manufacturing, packaging, or logistics phases. So, for example, a cereal manufacturer may be producing a cereal, and the manufacturing line is going quite fast and it's automated, and something goes wrong and the cereal breaks, or its constituent form breaks down, and it's not the shape that the consumer would expect it to be in. That entire production line has to be discarded because it's not good enough to be on the shelf in a retail store. And that stuff, prior to FoodForward SA being involved, is actually stuff that is ending up in landfill sites or being incinerated. And so those are the kind of things we want to intercept at the right time so that we can use this good food to be able to feed people. According to how big is the problem, the Department of Environmental Affairs tells us that roughly 55 million tons of general waste was generated, and only 11% of this was able to go to diverted from landfill, while more than 50% of this food is organic waste, food that that is usable, and as others will show you, roughly 10 million tons of this food is ending up as waste, and there's a huge opportunity here to be able to intercept this food. The cost to our economy of this food waste on an annual basis is roughly 61 million rand, and that those calculations don't include wasted water, energy resources taken into account to be able to produce that food that we use on a daily basis. This is what FoodForward SA exists for. What we try and do is connect this world of surplus or excess to this world of need. So we recover quality edible surplus food from farmers, manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers. And we call this cost-effective model food banking. More, but why this model is cost-effective? Here's just an infographic infographic outlining exactly how the process works. On the left-hand side of the equation, we have our supply chain partners, and while it's predominantly food partners, there's also a huge amount of non-food items that we do recover. Toiletries, detergents, and personal hygiene items that we can use to donate to organizations that could use them. On the opposite side of that equation, we make sure that this food is distributed to organizations that have feeding programs, creches, early childhood development centers, shelters, homes that care for the aged and frail. And a lot of our organizations, roughly 75% of the organizations that receive our food, they focus on education, skills development, youth, and women. So in many ways, we are not only addressing the problem of hunger or short-term hunger, but we're also addressing this problem of making an impact into communities using food as the incentive to do this. So there are various ways that food reaches our inventory. The first one is what we call warehouse food banking, or we also call that traditional food banking, where we source, collect, store, and then redistribute quality edible surplus food from farmers, manufacturers, and retailers. That food comes into our warehouses. We check it, we sort it, we store it, and then we redistribute that to beneficiary organizations across the country. Organizations that are in close proximity to where our warehouses are in urban settlements, in urban centers, they will come and fetch the food at our warehouses. And then in rural communities, we take the food to those rural communities. So we've selected so far 13 rural communities across the country where we're able to distribute that food to. And so on a monthly basis, more than 1,000 organizations benefit from these food collections. We also have a digital platform or digital solution called FoodShare. And what we do there is our platform connects beneficiary organizations, nonprofit organizations that are registered with retail stores for the regular collection of surplus food. So we can pay Food Lovers Market and Woolworths all participate in this program, and we are able to seamlessly connect organizations to be able to go to their local store within a 5-kilometer radius to go and collect surplus edible food from those stores. And then our technology not only connects them, but it also manages that surplus food and makes sure that there's record keeping of those surpluses. So while our model does, as I said earlier, reach thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, there's also a social impact to our model. So in the last financial year, which ends end of February, we distributed around about 7,000 tons of food, equating to 28 million meals. And our cost per meal is just 85 cents because that food is donated free of charge. And the cost to us is only the distribution network of making sure that food gets out to where it is most needed. We operate in all 9 provinces. 5 of the 9 provinces, we have physical warehouses and locations and cold chain facilities. And at the moment, 4 of those provinces, which is Limpopo, the Northern Cape, Free State, and Mpumalanga, we take food on a monthly basis to those organizations until we've reached critical mass where we are able to set up physical locations there as well. So food banking in itself, although it benefits people that suffer from short-term hunger, it is also an environmental solution. What happens throughout the supply chain is that supply chain actors dump huge amounts of food. So reducing food waste and loss is the 3rd most efficient and cost-effective solution to be able to address climate change. And WWF, along with a company called Greenhouse, did a study in 2018 on our food banking model and found that for every ton of food that FoodForward SA is able to recover from the supply chain, 4 tons of greenhouse gas emissions are saved. So why surplus food recovery makes sense? Firstly, it is economical. Our cost per meal is only 85 cents, which makes us the most cost-effective solution to address hunger at this point in time, and comes at the right time because when you talk about millions of people that have lost their jobs just in the past year, coupled with those that were unemployed, prior to COVID-19. We sit with a situation where nearly 30 million people in our country are food insecure and vulnerable at this time. And there is not enough money to be able to procure food and make sure that everyone gets fed. So we have to think outside of the box, and this is one of the solutions that is certainly one of the more plausible. All the food that we receive is quality edible surplus food. We do not take stock that's expired. We do not take stock that is rotten. All that we have arrangements and agreements with all our supply chain partners that there's minimum standards with regard to what they are able to donate, so that they do not dump that stock, but that we get quality surplus food that we are able to distribute. In the past financial year, we actually have a metric that looks at how much of that food is nutritious, and we've just hit 81%. So just over 81% of the food that we provide to beneficiary organizations is nutritious food. Using this food banking model, we can increase access to food for those that can't afford it. We can reach millions of people every single month. Our organization provides food to just over 1,000 registered nonprofit organizations every single month with food, so that they're able to reach roughly 500,000 people on a daily basis with either 1 meal a day, 2 meals a day, and some of our facilities they get 3 meals a day plus snacks. That 7,000 tons equates to 28 million meals that we distributed just in the last 11 months or so. And our impact is measurable. This panel will be the first to know that we've had in the past 6 months, we asked an independent company called Impact Amplifier to do a study, a scientific study on the social impact of our model. And the findings show that roughly 1.6 billion rands worth of social returns have been extracted through our model in the previous financial year, at a cost of just 16 million rand, which is the cost of running our organization. So the SROI, or the social return on investment quantum, comes to roughly 98 rand. So every rand that we spend on our model, 98 rands worth of social returns, quantifiable social returns, are able to be extracted using food that would have ended up in landfill. There are tax benefits to food donors that improves their bottom line. So we don't see ourselves as a charity organization. We are very much a B2B solution. Where our farmers, wholesalers, retailers, where it costs them huge amounts of money to dump food or to incinerate that stock, we will take that stock off their hands. And so the savings for them by saving immediately by not dumping that stock, but also they get tax certificates for those donations, which improves their bottom line. And of course, as I said earlier, it's an environmentally friendly solution. So what are some of the challenges throughout this supply chain environment? So most of the food waste occurs on the pre-consumer side, agri sector, manufacturing sector, and the retail sector. And this is where we really need to thrust our efforts to make sure partners come on board so that they donate and instead of incinerate stock. There is also a lack of data on the actual tonnages and around food waste and where the specific quantities are coming from in the agri sector, manufacturing sector, and retail sector, and how those are broken down in minute form. So we need more current research on this whole waste profile, or I prefer to call it surplus food profile, because it's good usable food, and we can, if we intercept it at the right time, it's surplus food and not waste. We still have a huge amount of actors in the supply chain that are dumping and incinerating quality edible surplus food. And one of the reasons for that is around the liability issues. They're quite fearful around liability issues because of the Consumer Protection Act, and so they want to make sure that they want to protect their brand. But we've worked for the last 11 years now with manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers to make sure that number one, we get good quality food. Number two, that our processes are in place around food safety to make sure that we give good quality food to our beneficiary organizations. So that's why people partner with us and why our supply chain partners partner with us. We do need national and provincial policy and a framework for the recovery of edible surplus food to be able to incentivize manufacturers to be able to donate under certain conditions. We've put together a piece of legislation around this in partnership with Workmen's Attorneys, WWF, and the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, and we've been trying very hard to get government to have a look at this, and we have been unsuccessful so far, but it will not deter us from keep on trying. Department of Environmental Affairs organic waste to landfill targets have been set, and many people don't know about this, that by 2022 organic waste to landfill in the Western Cape, for example, must be reduced by 50%, and 2027 by 100%. Yet many actors in the supply chain are not even aware of this when we engage with them. So I think more of this needs to be publicized so that supply chain partners are aware and that they start looking at alternatives like recovery and redistribution. And we need more food chain supply chain partners to be transparent about their food loss and waste, and then to set targets around reduction. The Consumer Goods Council will talk more about that with regard to the voluntary agreements, which is a step in the right direction. However, there are some opportunities in this equation. Firstly, there are hundreds of thousands of non-profit organizations that are just waiting to be able to take this edible surplus food so that we can address the problem of hunger across our country. There are also agri-processing opportunities. If you look to the left of my screen, we get surplus tomatoes from some of our farmers, and we make tomato jam from that and tomato pasta sauce, which we give free of charge to our beneficiary organizations. There are huge job creation opportunities and industries that can be set up around surplus food, so the inputs are low, which maximizes profits. Huge income generation opportunities as well, where we could use unemployed people to be able to sell things like our tomato jam and our pasta sauce. And I do know that there's lots of talk around beneficiation throughout that waste sector, and it's growing quite fast. As I said earlier, the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa voluntary agreements with supply chain partners as part of their members is definitely a step in the right direction. And we do need more meaningful collaboration between ourselves and supply chain partners. Thank you very much for the opportunity to do this presentation. Over to you, Lisa.
Super, thank you, Andy. It really is the most incredible organization. And once COVID hit, I must say I ramped up my donations to FoodForward, because that 85 cents a meal is just quite something if you think of how, a donation and how far that can go in terms of feeding people. So we've got quite a few questions. So our first one is around do we have a bit more detail on the type of, or breakdown on the losses from harvesting and handling, processing, how is that 50% and 45% made up?
Yeah, so that's part of the problem, that we don't know the minutiae or the minute detail around this. That the stats I'm quoting are from WWF's 2018 report about food loss and waste, and they do cite there that one of the issues is that there needs to be better transparency around where exactly throughout the supply chain we have these bottlenecks and these issues. But there's just not enough study being going into this. I do know that Professor Olofse from the CSIR and her team are updating their 2013 study, which we cite all the time, around the 61 billion rand annually and 10 million tons. They are updating that, but we do need PhDs to be able to look into the food loss and waste throughout the food value chain, so that we are able to get more credible information around where this huge amounts of loss are taking place and why.
Great, thank you. And do we have any data on which sort of foods are collected? So is it bread versus fresh fruit versus veg, dairy, meats that is then redistributed from the food bank?
Absolutely.
From FoodForward?
Yeah, sure. We do have that data in quite a fair amount of detail, and so most of the food that we do get are canned goods, starches like rice and pastas. with quite a bit of sauces, not so much baked goods, but we do our beneficiary organizations do get that from the stores through our food share technology platform. But we do get huge amounts of maize meal, sugar, rice, cooking oil. We even get some non-food ingredients like lotions and soaps that are able to be used, and handy Andy and those kind of detergents as well. So roughly 98% of the food that of the tonnage we get in is food, and just 2% of that is non-food items, and roughly 80% of that is nutritious food, which is yogurts, dairy, milk, cereals, canned goods, and those kind of things.
So that actually leads on to the next question. What is considered nutritious? What is the definition there? And then what makes up the other 19%?
Yeah, so we use the definitions cited by the Department of Health. I forget the specific text around that, but they assisted us with when we developed our food categories into what is nutritious food and what's not nutritious food. And I know that's a subject for further discussion amongst your panelists here, that would go into further detail around what is nutritious or not nutritious. I think our core focus, though, is to address the problem of hunger using the recovery of edible surplus food as a model and food banking. So the fact that it's nutritious food makes it an added bonus. A large portion of that food that we do get in is fresh fruit and vegetables that we get through our partnerships with Nedbank Agri, Standard Bank Agri, Hello Choice, and also directly with our farmers across the country. So fruit and vegetables make up a huge component of that. We do get quite a bit of things like maize meal, fortified maize meal, milks, cereals, and those kind of things.
Great, thank you. And then just a question on, so if there was a food safety incident or some sort of illness, who is held liable in terms of that?
Yeah, so that's exactly the issue why not all the manufacturers or other supply chain don't want to participate, because I think that question has been left unanswered and it is unclear. But just to give you some idea, we do have protocols around food safety and recalls in throughout our network. And I've been with the organization for 8 years, and we've had 2 recalls with 2 food owners that we've had to manage. Of those 2, none of them ended up consumed by any of our beneficiaries, so we were able to intercept it in time. But the who's responsible is a question that remains up in the air, and one of the reasons why our food donors or some of the food owners do not participate in our food banking model is the fear that because they've got the bigger pockets, they will be pursued around liability issues. So that is a huge concern and a deterrent for some. But we have a number of manufacturers in our equation, including Tiger Brands, RCL, Rhodes Foods, Nestle, and others that participate with us. But they've got protocols on their side, and we've got safety protocols on our side to make sure that what goes out is food safe. So we've never had an incident in the 11 years of our organization's existence, and certainly not in the 8 years that I've been here.
Thank you. Andy, then there's another question around volunteering opportunities for food professionals. What are the needs there?
Absolutely. So our model is quite labor intensive because we check every single unit or every single canned good, every single toothpaste tube before it goes out. So there's a huge amount of sorting that takes place. And for that, we do have a corporate volunteering program. So we have companies like Massmart, Nestle, Engine, and others that come and do corporate volunteering at our warehouses across the country. And so they come spend half a day or a few hours in the morning to come and sort stock and also understand how our process works and make sure that that food gets to beneficiary organizations. So there are huge amounts of volunteering opportunities. If you visit our website on the donate page and you scroll down to the bottom, there's more information of how you can get involved, either volunteering opportunities at our facility, or you can do a food drive in your company or in your community and then donate that food on to FoodForward SA.
Super. Nice suggestion here around has the FoodForward looked at a model of creating food waste stores that could encourage people that are not necessarily food insecure but need more low-cost options to actually come and purchase food?
Yeah, so one of the options we are looking into, well, one of the things we can't do is resell food that has been donated to us by our supply chain partners. So we're not allowed to do that. But one of the things we are exploring, and that will come to fruition in the near future, which is what some food banks across the world already do, is create food pantries or supermarkets where poor people that have been screened either by social workers or the Department of Social Development or the Department of Health, for example, we have a partnership with them where they are able to do house visits and assess family needs. They will actually have the privilege to shop at one of our stores, but not pay a cent for that privilege, and they will get access to exactly the kind of stuff that you will see on a retailer's shelf. So that's coming in the near future.
Great, super. Thank you, Andy. I think we probably need to move on to our next speaker. I just have a last question around the sources and the jams and the agro-processing there. I know at some stage you were working with AgriStation here in Cape Town. Where are you at the moment in terms of that part of the program?
Yeah, so at the moment we're collecting roughly once a week from some of our farmers, and that stock goes directly to a manufacturer out in Piketberg that employs mostly women, and we were introduced to that manufacturer by Woolworths, who uses that manufacturer to be able to produce their jams that are in their stores. So essentially, our beneficiary organizations are receiving a Woolworths quality product, absolutely no charge, from inputs such as tomatoes that we haven't paid for, making this just one cost-effective model and an opportunity to be able to be scaled up.
Brilliant. Super. Thank you so much, Andy. Thanks for your talk. And if anyone has any further questions, I'm sure you can get hold of Andy directly. So we'll move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Sibulela Ngeniswa. She's a food scientist with a background in legislation, understanding and administration, food safety and nutrition. She's passionate about sustainability. She joined the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa in 2018 as a food safety technical administrator. And part of her role is to administer and look after the Food Loss and Waste Project, which she'll be sharing with us a lot more about that initiative that was launched last year in September. So please remember to put questions in the chat, and over to you, Sibulela.
Good morning, everyone. Please confirm if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you and we can see your presentation.
Okay. So let me do this. And then do this. Okay, it seems like from my side, when I'm showing my presentation, I can only see my face, big face on the screen, and then I can't see my presentation. So please advise.
Sharon, what do we do now? Should she start again? Reshare it?
Oh, I can hide my face because we can see
both. We can see your face and your slides.
Okay, but I can't see my slides. I only see my face.
Okay, we can see your slides and your face today.
Okay, let me do this. All right. But
if it's easier for you, then maybe just turn the webcam off. Maybe your slides will pop back.
Yes, I'll just turn it on when we are at the question and answer session. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Awesome. Okay, sorry about that. Technology never loved us. So I'm Sibulela Ngeniswa, as Lisa had said, from the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. We are a member-based organization. We represent more than 9,000 member companies, and we pride ourselves in helping members trade better and dealing also with non-competitive issues that affect them. So part of our role is to support, advise and advocate for our members, and the Food Loss and Waste Initiative is part of that. We are divided into 4 pillars We've got the Food Safety Initiative, which I'm part of, and then we have Crime and Risk Division, the GS1, your barcodes, and then we have an SMME leg. So as Andy had indicated about the Sustainable Development Goals, so what happened is that the South African government, they signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals, and then the Food Loss and Waste Initiative is part of that, which falls under Goal 12.3. So we did a major research to see how it affects other Sustainable Development Goals that we needed to achieve as a country, and we saw that the impact of actually tackling the food loss and waste is huge in terms of it contributes to poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, sustainable cities and communities, the climate action, because it has a huge impact on the environment, the life below water, and the life on land. So our main vision is to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030. And it includes adopting the food utilization hierarchy, which prioritizes the prevention of food loss and waste, redistribution where prevention was not possible, and then also following other avenues of the food utilization hierarchy. And the purpose why we're doing this, it's because of the social impact that it has, as Andy has dwelt on that aspect. And then it also has a financial impact in terms of the companies and the resources that go into producing food. And also the environmental aspect of it, looking at how the landfills are getting full. For example, the Joburg landfill is full, and also that land could have been used to grow water, but now we're using it to grow food, but now we're using it to actually throw away stuff. So it's issues like that, and also the green gas emissions, and that has huge impact on the environment. So our journey started when we were approached by the DTIC, which is the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, and they asked to partner with us, the Consumer Goods Council, because we represent the retailers. We have retailers and manufacturers as our members. So we got a funding by the European Union, and then when we got the funding, we started the dialogues. The dialogue started in 2018, where we introduced the concept to different stakeholders. And the beauty of this initiative is that it's collaboration. We had government, we had private companies, and then we also had your universities. So it's a very broad stakeholder involvement. And then so we've been having workshops, consulting with stakeholders, different workshops, and then it was agreed that it is best to follow the voluntary agreement route, which is something that I will just explain later on. And to date now, we've got signatories that have signed up, and we've started our next dialogues on the food and packaging waste. So I needed to discuss this because I felt like it's very important when we are trying to understand the impact of what we are doing. Because when we look at the cost of waste, we only look sometimes at the disposal cost without actually looking at the lost materials that go into producing that food, the energy costs, the labor cost, the water cost, and the other costs that are involved in producing food, depending on which part of the value chain it is. So a study was done to indicate, to just evaluate how much it costs actually to save on waste. So it was done on 1,000 business sites, 1,200 business sites, and then 200 companies were approached, and then in 17 countries, including South Africa. So the study found that for every R1 of food that is of money that is invested like in reducing food loss, there is a 14 Rand investment. And then I will just quickly share this video with you. It will give you a broad understanding of where the voluntary agreement is coming from, and it's actually stakeholder testimonial.
The South African and European Union Strategic Partnership supports the Department of Trade and Industry and Consumer Goods Council of SA in hosting a food waste dialogue series with the objective to launch a multi-sectoral voluntary agreement on food waste, from farm to fork. Approximately 1/3 of all food produced globally is either lost or wasted, and this is no different in South Africa. Yet, more than 13 million South Africans routinely experience hunger. The Sustainable Development Goal 12 is a global initiative to reduce food waste by half by 2030, and South Africa is joining the fight. Richard Swanell is the director of global nonprofit organization RAP. He paints a picture from an environmental perspective.
So we waste 1/3 of all the food produced on the planet. That means for every 2 tons of food we consume, 1 ton is wasted. To give you an idea of the scale of that, that's 1.3 billion tons of food waste. And that has a massive environmental impact.
The dialogue is a direct response to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 12 towards responsible consumption and production. In addressing this, we are also delivering against other SDG commitments, such as poverty, hunger, good health and well-being, sustainable cities, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, our impact on our oceans and on the earth. Founder of social enterprise Smart Markers from the Netherlands, Natasha Kooijman shares her insights on the food waste crisis.
Then food waste is not a problem, it's a symptom of underlying problems, of system errors. We also need to look at why do we waste this much food? What is the underlying structure that causes this? And then I think you have multiple things still to talk about.
The proposed outcome is a voluntary agreement between government and industry on food donation legislation, food labeling legislation, and sustainable production methods.
My views on voluntary agreements is that is a perfect start in a situation where the environment is not regulated, but it sort of activates the system.
The Consumer Goods Council of South Africa is leading the movement across the country to launch a South African food waste voluntary agreement.
I think it would not have been possible for CGCSA to accomplish this without this SA-EU dialogue. And I think that the support that we received from the EU has allowed us to get to this point.
Trying to reduce food waste is everyone's responsibility. And one of the key things about having sessions like this piece, funded by the dialogue, is to get those discussions and linkages really working well between people. And this opportunity in South Africa is a brilliant development, and there's so much enthusiasm now to make it happen. And I think of all the things that we might do to try and save the planet, food waste is right up there.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope that was informative. So, why the voluntary agreement approach? That's what one of the questions that we've been hearing from the stakeholders. And as we can agree that South Africa is well regulated, and when there's a chance for us like to come together and work on this good cause, then we encourage that behavior, especially when stakeholders are willing to come together and tackle issues. And what is a voluntary agreement? It is a call to action or a framework for action where everyone agrees, is at the same pace, and different people in the value chain, they are playing their part in terms of food loss and waste reduction. And this approach has advantages in terms of, we know that legislation, it takes a number of years to be finalized, it has to go back and forth for draft, collecting comments from stakeholders. And also this approach is actually faster in terms of us getting to work immediately and everyone doing what they can do in terms of where they are in the value chain. And then it just also is a journey that has been walked on by other countries. So we don't have to reinvent everything. We can align and try to change it maybe some way to also fit the South African situation. So we've got countries like UK that are already implementing this voluntary agreement. So it's also the partnership with other countries in terms of learning the best practices and how we're doing things. And then our goal actually is to reduce, as I mentioned before, half food loss and waste by 2030. So we want to establish a baseline by 2022 where everyone agrees that, okay, now we will start reporting, because one of the things that we cannot be effective in our attempts to reduce food loss and waste if we don't know how much food is lost and wasted and where does it occur the most. Because in our strategies to reduce, we must also make like informed decisions so that we don't waste resources on irrelevant or in irrelevant places. So by 2026, we want to at least have reduced the 28%. So in 2022, we develop the baseline. Then by 2026, we will work on reducing at least 28%, so that by 2030, we are able to reach our target. So to make this a huge success, it was important that, because in our dialogues and conversations with different stakeholders, 8 working groups were suggested. But because we are working on limited or with limited funding, we had to prioritize certain working groups so that we can start the implementation as soon as possible. So the first working group that will be having the first meeting on is the Food Surplus Nutrition and Redistribution Working Group. And this meeting, just to announce it, put it out there, it will be on the 24th of February, but it is a closed meeting for only the signatories that have already signed up to be part of the initiative. So the other second working group, it's the reporting and evaluation, monitoring, reporting and evaluation working group. This is where we get experts on the subject. We get people that come together to bring solutions on how to effectively approach our targets. And then the other one is the whole chain value working group. This one we have somehow put it on hold because we're looking at, once we start reporting, then the numbers are coming, then we can be able to see, okay, this is where it occurs the most. And then when we have this whole chain, so that we can also effectively identify the hotspots. Yes, there are already hotspots that the researchers have identified. For example, CSIR has a report on that. So they have identified that, but now it will be supported by numbers in terms of the reporting part. And then the policy standards and legislation. And as Andy has said, there's this liability issue that needs to be sorted out. So it is this working group, but our approach in this working group is not like closed off to certain people who sign, but it will be a round table approach where we have the relevant government departments in place, we have the affected stakeholders, so that we can be able to have the questions and the solutions in the room, like how we approach all our dialogues. So, and then the reporting, we have adopted the WRI reporting protocol, which we are trying also, we're working together with REP and them, and they're trying to simplify it in terms of getting it to be user friendly, because at the current stage it is more complex and it is a bit exhaustive, as some members have indicated. So now we're looking at simplifying it so that it's easy to use for also farmers, because we want everyone in the value chain to do their part. So we're trying to simplify it. We're trying to also get a software, I don't know the IT terms, but a an app that people can log into and be reporting that, okay, today in everything that we did in our production, this much was wasted. So they weigh their waste and they can report in the app, and the app collects the data, and at the end of the day it gives us like the results on how much that certain company, and this information will be confidential, but what we can share based on the company that signs up to say that, okay, we are happy to let the public know about the progress that we are making as a company. So it's only in those cases that we can share that information, but it remains confidential, but we'll just add it up so that we can update also the government departments that we're working with in terms of knowing where we are in our reductions as a country. And then the signatories and the sign-up processes. There are two types of signatories. We have the core signatories. These are the people that are responsible for growing food, for producing, manufacturing, like processing, and also the retail. These are the people that are actually dealing with the food product. And then we have the associate signatories. These are your food banks, your NDs. These are your government departments in terms of enabling the core signatories in terms of maybe legislation. And these are also your research and solution providers in terms of writing papers, giving solutions in order to support the core signatories. So the letters of commitment, they have certain like items or certain parts that you can say, okay, we are committing to do 1, 2, 3 as our company, because this is what our processes entails. So when you sign this letter of commitment, you will just indicate what you are committing to and which working group you would like to be part of. So to date, we have 37 signatories that have signed up, and I'm just sharing with you some of the signatories that have signed up. And because this initiative is already funded by the SA EU Dialogue Facility, and recently we got also funding from P4G, which is a UK funding. So what we are doing is that we're using those fundings to help with the implementation, because we know that members are not in a good place to be paying for anything at this stage. But we're looking also into the sustainability of this initiative so that we are able to achieve our goals. So to date, these are the signatories that have signed up, and this initiative is open for to everyone. Anyone can join and be part of this initiative and do their part. And then these are the associate signatories, and as I have mentioned, I don't know why it's going on its own, that we have government departments, we've got universities, we've got research and solution providers. So we've got a broader stakeholders, and we've got also recyclers like your Bokashi brand. So we create that system, that network, and also that place where everyone can come together, everyone can connect with other stakeholders, so that we're all working towards one goal. And then the benefits of signing this is that it's free, and everyone who signs up, they have access to the reporting portal, and you can attend the dialogues, as many as you are available to attend, and then you can receive like alerts and some studies that we'll be having from the researchers that have joined to be part of this initiative. The only thing that you need to pay for at this moment is that once we have the reporting portal ready, you will have to go through a certain training to ensure that the data that you are uploading is credible, because we can't have everyone just having access without going through the training. And also the training, what you're paying for, it's just the resources of the training that are involved. So the cost will be welcomed, but stakeholders and signatories, they will be alerted before time. And then if you want to join the initiative, you can visit our website, the CGCSA website. You go to the FSI, and then you just see the Food Loss and Waste Initiative. And then you can read also more there about the signatory. We have uploaded the voluntary agreement there, so you can just read there. The voluntary agreement is there. Also the benefits of signing up in depth, and also the option, the signature forms, they are also uploaded in the website. And we've also developed a pamphlet which is available for stakeholders if you want it. So you can have, it's moving on its own. I don't know why. So we've also developed this nice pamphlet that you can have, you can share with everyone in your, wherever you are in the value chain. Okay, in conclusion, why are we tackling food loss and waste? It's because it makes a strong business case, and also we encourage the prevention, because prevention is best. Is best. And also in a case where it is unavoidable, then we can donate the food, because also it doesn't make sense why throw food away when there's so many people who are sleeping with empty stomach. So also the environmental case of it all is that it's the right thing to do. It's a right thing to do. And also as Andy has indicated, it is the third biggest green gas emitter in the world globally. So yeah, that is all from my side. Thank you so much. Now, before I stop, the food and packaging waste, we are starting the dialogues on that now. They've already started. So if you'd like to be part of that, because we also want to look at the packaging, because we can't solve the food and also the packaging waste separately, because packaging has a part in terms of preserving food. So we're started with those dialogues now, so that when we solve the packaging problems in the country, we also take into consideration its impact in terms of the food and what we want to achieve. Thank you so much. Those are my contact details. Any questions for me?
Thank you, Sibulela. We don't have any questions at the moment on the question box. Just one thing from my side, will there be, as part of the voluntary agreement, some work happening with the government in terms of potentially regulations that enable food redistribution, etc.? But like Andy spoke to, is that part of the agreement, is to work with government to put more enabling policies into place to help?
Yes, definitely. So that's the roundtable policy and standard approach that we'll be having a dialogue very soon on that. But it is closed off to signatories and people that have signed up and committed to the initiative. So it's not open to everyone. So yeah, to solve the problem that those signatories are experiencing in terms of the policy.
Yes, super. Thank you. And thank you for your presentation and this excellent initiative. So we'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Stefan Hayward. He has a PhD in biochemistry. He's a postdoctoral researcher with the University of Stellenbosch, and he's also with Innovative Research Solutions. And Stefan will be talking about valorisation of food waste streams and the complex challenges around that, but opportunities as well. So over to you, Stefan.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. Just to make sure, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yes, good day, and thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to actually discuss a topic that is quite a passion of mine. Valorization of food waste is one of those things that's not only important, but it is, I think it's indispensable for the going forward
Stefan,
to the future. Yes.
Just in terms of your presentation, that we're seeing the presenter slide. If you want to change
okay, well, let me just quickly switch that over. Okay, now?
Yeah, perfect. Great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think going forward in the future, we're going to have to start innovating our way out of this mess that we are in. As we have seen from the previous presenters as well, the stats are a little bit difficult to actually comprehend because there's a lot of factors that influence it. But I will go into that a little bit on the next slide. So just based on the presentation of the first speaker, we saw that he said there's 14 million people out of the 56.72 million in South Africa that is going hungry every night. Now, just this discrepancy already shows how difficult it is to get the stats. This was the stats I have here is from an article that was published in the Daily Maverick. And even with this lower value of 12 million out of 56.72, it's already a fifth of the population that went to bed hungry in 2020. This is 10 million tons of food that gets wasted despite 20% of our population going hungry. This costs the economy in a time that we are already crippled by the effects of the coronavirus. It's costing us 61.5 billion a year. So just to put it into context that all South Africans would and should understand, together, the first alcohol ban and cigarette ban cost the economy 19 billion. This is still a fraction of what it costs us each year in just thrown away food. So it is quite a significant value if you think about it. This is even more or almost more than last year's bailouts for SAL. So it's something that we do have to take into account because that money can be spent more wisely elsewhere. Okay, so the biggest issue is that it's very easy to say that, it's very easy to say that companies have to do more. We have to valorize, we have to convert the food waste, but it's not as simple as it might seem. So if we go to a simple slide or a simple example like this, our previous speakers pointed out that there's a difference between food loss and food waste. Now the difference is, in very broad terms, it's basically the homogeneity of the sample of the product itself. So looking at this very pretty orchard over here, you can see that very nice apples on the trees and then a lot of apples on the ground. This is actually the wasted apples. So in a lot of cases, apples are harvested by hand, and any of the apples that have small blemishes or little marks on it or do not make the color grade, they are actually just left on the ground to rot. Now, for me, the solution over here is quite simple. When life gives you apples, you make apple cider. Unfortunately, this becomes a little bit more difficult when the food waste stream looks like this. So this is the main difference between food waste and food loss, now in picture format. So food loss is anything that is lost all the way from farm to fork. It's all the processes in between. Food waste also includes all the products that's wasted from restaurants. So all the scraps that you didn't eat that's left on your plate that goes into a bin and it gets thrown away. The difficulty comes in with processing something like the apples over here or the food waste over here. Harvesting apples and making apple cider is very easy because it's a clean, homogeneous product that goes into the factory. If you want to take this into your factory, what will be the implications on FSSC, HACCP, SANAS, all those kinds of accreditations? What would the food safety manager of the company say when you say, okay, well, I've got a bin of this, let's turn it into something? So we have to keep this in mind that when we are looking at food waste, it's not a simple solution. It's not something that we can quickly convert. Now, I've spoken in the past about ways to valorize food waste in the form of hand sanitizer from bread. So here's that slide again. The issue here is that with bread coming in from the factory or from retailers, it's relatively homogeneous and it's safe to work with. There's no problems, there's no human health risks associated with it. You're going to cook it up with some enzymes and you're going to add yeast and it's going to ferment into alcoholic product, but it's not going to be technically dangerous to work with. It's not going to contaminate your entire factory. So this is where the difficulty comes in. If you've got a homogeneous waste stream coming in, it's easy to work out something to actually do with it. But if you've got skins of apples and all kinds of things coming in, it's going to become difficult because there's going to be growth on it, there's going to be mold on it, there's going to be, everything's going to grow quicker on a carbohydrate rich source of ingredients. So the further problem to compound this is that with a case like this, where we converted the bread waste into alcohol, it creates yet more waste. We've converted the carbohydrates to sugars that the yeast can ferment, but afterwards we're still left with protein and some yeast residue. In this picture, I don't know if it's going to be clear on your screens at home, but you'll see there's a faint line going there. That's about 60 kilograms of leftover protein material and yeast mixed together. Now it becomes a problem. Where do you throw this away? How can you use this in a subsequent step? So this is the things that we have to think about when actually trying to convert food waste into a valuable product. So I'm not trying to be devil's advocate over here, but I'm showing or trying to make the point that it's more difficult than it seems. So in the next few slides, I'll use a few examples of how we can actually valorize something that will be seen as a straight waste product. So there's hidden value in everything. If we look at this picture on the slide, what do you see? Well, for me, I see pure deliciousness with some Bulgaric yogurt on a summer's day with a beer in hand. But this is only what the marketers want you to see. This is why they do take pictures like this. It's because they want you to see how succulent and juicy this looks and how nice it is. But the better question would be, what don't you see? There's no skins on this kiwi fruit. There's no cores or pips on the inside of this apple. I'm not sure exactly what that is. It looks like a block of cheese, but there's no whey included with that cheese. There's no stems included with the grapes or with the strawberries. So all of these things are waste products. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that when this is manufactured in the factory, there are workers working with it. So it's technically 100% safe to work with. So the skins, once you remove it from the plant material, it doesn't all of a sudden become dangerous to work with. Right there, you have a waste source that's relatively homogeneous. You know, every time if you're going to make 100 salads, you're going to have this amount of kiwi fruit, you're going to have this amount of apple cores. So the feed source would stay relatively constant. You also know that it's safe if you store it correctly. So I would propose looking at something like this, and rather than looking at, yes, this is delicious, of course, life is not all about the negatives. We have to look at the positives as well, but try and see the value in the things that most people don't see. Look at what can be done rather than what's straight in front of you. Okay, so if we now have to take all of these stems, the cores, the leaves, the pips and the skins and everything, and we have to valorize it, how do we actually do this? Now, it's technically a very simple procedure if you look at a slide like this. So it starts with homogenization and goes through fractionation and then purification, which on this slide may seem very simple, but the homogenization step, depending on the feedstock, can have multiple different procedures in between. There can be ultrasonic disruption, there can be grinding, there can be all kinds of processes that you first must do before you can actually disrupt the cells and release the intracellular constituents, because this is where the stuff is that you really want or that you want to separate out. The biggest thing that you have to keep in mind here is that you have to understand what you're working with. If you're working with, say, fruits and you want to valorize a protein or an enzyme from it, you have to keep in mind where that enzyme will be. Is it water soluble? Is it hydrophobic? So it doesn't want to go into the solids phase. So that all influences the process that you will take to actually go on and produce something that you can fractionate. So as we all know, proteins are normally on the inside of cells, and I'll show that on the next slide just to show how the cell actually looks. But proteins are on the inside of the cells, and it's contained within the membrane for animals that's made out of lipids, for plants, cellulose, and all kinds of things. So this material by nature has to be hydrophobic, otherwise the cells will just dissolve. So if you are looking to purify fiber from your product, you will harvest, you will fractionate your sample, and you will collect the solid material. If you are looking for a specific enzyme that you want to use in a downstream process or in a different product, you will have to look at the water-soluble phase. So that's where fractionation comes in, and also the fractionation process. As I said, it's not as easy as just putting it in a bucket and waiting to settle out. The process itself should be suited for what you want to do. If you're harvesting enzymes and the fractionation process creates a lot of heat, it won't work because that will destroy the enzyme. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to have a good understanding of what we want to do and what we start with. Without this, the entire process will just cause a lot of frustration. Okay, so during the fractionation step, you separate the solids and the liquid phases from each other. If you're working with animal tissues or something like that, this also removes the connective tissues and all the cellular debris. The third step is purification. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can actually purify something from plant material or from animal material or whatever. The example on this slide is purification via column chromatography. This is most often used for protein purification. So if you want to purify an enzyme, say you want to purify bromelain from pineapple skins, then you can use column chromatography. But this is not going to work if you're going to be doing or trying to isolate the fiber from the same feedstock. So fiber is insoluble, so you won't be able to put it through a column. It will just block everything up, and they will maybe be shouting. Okay, so here on the next slide, I'll show you the example of a plant cell. So a plant cell is a nice little bag that keeps everything that the plant needs to survive on the inside. However, once the cell has reached the end of its lifetime, it has various enzymes and housekeeping enzymes in place. So if the cell is now too old, it needs to be discarded to make place for a new cell. Proteases will come in and it will start breaking down the proteins. Amylases will come and cellulases will come in and break down the cell walls. So this happens in normal growth and normal development of any living organism. But this is also the same that if you start disrupting the plant material, if you're going to do it with homogenization or whatever, these cellular constituents and the housekeeping enzymes are also released into the media. So you have to keep in mind that if you're trying to purify a protein, you have to keep proteases in mind, because the proteases will break down the protein you're trying to purify. If you're looking at starches or something like that, you're going to have to keep amylases in mind. You have to have some kind of inhibitor or some kind of a process to keep that in mind. This problem is, of course, compounded quite a bit because different feedstocks, different plants and different organisms have different levels of each of these enzymes. So, for instance, pineapples have a lot of bromelain, which is a protease, while something like barley, once it starts developing, or say wheat, will have more amylases, which will break down the starches. So you have to know what you're starting with. This is why it's important to start as close as possible to a homogeneous starting material that you can actually characterize and always know exactly this is what you're working with. This is what you're starting with. Only in that way can you optimize the extraction conditions in such a way that you do not have any losses in yield, or create problems downstream where something can cause maybe stickiness in your process or cause precipitation and blocking of some of the columns if you're purifying proteins. The extraction conditions need to be very tightly controlled, and this is only possible if you know what you're starting with. This is why it's important. So now on to the big question. If it is this difficult to actually valorize food waste, is it even possible? Is it possible? Is it viable to try and valorize food waste, to get any value out of it? Now, this is a difficult one to answer, and the question is yes, but there's always a but. We must start at the start. You can't go and try and jump, not just pass go and collect $200. You have to start at the start and play the game as it's designed to be. So in a valorization protocol, it starts with understand what you're working with. Before you understand, or you can only produce a product and manipulate the product after you've understood the entire process. So going back to the example of trying to use or looking at pineapple, this is now a very simple example. But most often when we use pineapple for whatever reason, for pizzas or whatever, it's only the fleshy bits that's used. The skin, all the skin material that contains all the fiber is discarded. So being South African, what do you see when you see at the waste material from the pineapple? You see the nice bits there, you can eat that straight away, but what do you see there? South Africans make pineapple beer, can make that easily from the skins. But what's less obvious is that pineapples also contain a lot of fiber. This fiber can be used to make renewable materials, such as bags and whatever. The enzymes in pineapple skins and the stalks and everything can be used in beauty products. It's even used in stuff like Jack Barrow's bristles. The bromelain, as I said earlier, is a protease which breaks down the cellular structure, the protein structure of meats. So that will give you more tender meat in a quicker time. You can go look on any of the meat tin or any of these braai sauces, there will be pineapple bromelain in there. It's also good for a few other things, but I won't go into too much detail on that now. So I've run through this presentation quite quickly, but I hope what I've been saying thus far is, and that the point is driven home, that we have to start looking at waste sources differently. We have to start looking at the hidden value, because for the future generations and the future of this of the entire globe, we have to start looking at different ways of doing things so we create less waste, more usable products, so we can actually feed the people that's supposed to make the world a better place. It can only start now. So what's waiting for us in the future? Do we want to see scenic mountains or mountains of waste? This mountain of waste over here, this Cape Town mountain is a very pretty sight. But what can you see in this mountain of waste over here? You can see there's pineapple. You can make bromelain out of that. There's some leaves and stuff there. You can extract fiber from there. There's bagels. You can extract some starches from there. There's a lot of material here that you can actually make something of. And although this picture looks like this now, where everything was dumped together, at some stage during processing, somebody skinned this watermelon. So before this, it was still safe to work with. So we just have to start looking at processes where we can compartmentalize and just separate things and store it together, rather than mixing everything up together and creating more problems downstream for valorization. In this state, it's almost impossible to make anything out of it except for fertilizer. Now, fertilizer itself is good as well, but that process takes water, it takes energy, it's CO2 emissions. So rather start it or stop the problem from happening at the beginning. So Galileo Galilei once said that all truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover it. Now, valorizing food waste is not an easy process, and this is not the easy thing to do. It's not something that we should shy away from. Rather, let's embrace it as a society and companies and everyone getting together and innovating ourselves out of this. This is the only way that we can move forward in a sustainable manner. Wasting a third of the production, the food produced in a year, is not, it's not sustainable, and it's despicable that it's actually happening. So, will you drive at exactly 88 miles per hour with me, granted there's a thunderstorm nearby? Will you go into the future with me and think of ways how we can innovate ourselves out of this mess we're actually creating at this stage? How can we, for future generations, how can we start creating value from something that looks valueless? This is only something that can be done through industry, in collaboration with universities, the individual. It starts with you. So thank you very much on that for the previous speakers for the work they do. But let's all join in and try and find ways of innovating ourselves into the future. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you, Stefan. As always, a very entertaining talk. Thank you. A question from my side. I don't see any yet coming up on the chat. What are you researching at the moment? What waste streams have you had a look at? And where do you think your research will go in the future?
So a lot of the work that we do in collaboration with the university is, of course, now on the bread. We work in collaboration with Pioneer Foods, that's now PepsiCo. We do work on valorization of some of their waste streams, mainly bread. But there are other things that we also looked at. For insect feed, we're looking at everywhere that we can find a waste stream that's easily obtainable and safe to work with for now. It's something here at the university, it's the Center for Food Safety. So food safety is a major issue in the department, and also the health and safety of everyone, especially at this time, is a major concern. So we're looking at sources where we can find value, where we can find waste sources that we can valorize in relatively simple terms with what we have available. As always, you learn each step that you do, you learn new lessons for the next round. So we're building up our toolbox to actually valorize almost anything that we can lay our hands on.
Great. We've got a question here around what is the single biggest homogeneous waste product in South Africa?
Sure. Looking
without a lot of reporting, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that's happening. I think bread is one of them. It's definitely one of them. But if you look at something like waste streams coming from breweries, barley, spent barley, it's not being valorized in all kinds of ways. They're making cookies out of it. They're making animal feed. They're making fuel for burners and all that kind of stuff. But it's also a source that I think you can get a lot more value out of it than just burning it for heating fuel. But if I just have to think off the top of my head, I think bread would be one of the biggest. Something like whey from cheese making. That's also quite a big. There are groups that's now busy working trying to make actual electricity from whey conversion. So there are groups that are busy with that. But I think in South Africa, at least in South Africa, bread, spent barley, and whey would be some of the biggest contributors to food waste.
Right. And then we have a question here about biofuel. Is that still a topic for discussion? It was very big in the 90s.
I think biofuel is one of those things that it is important to actually investigate, because as we go forward, our dependence on fossil fuels needs to reduce. If we look at the devastating effects on the planet, on global warming, everything that's associated with it, we have to start thinking of ways where we can sort of reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. So biofuels, it's still in its infancy, I think, in terms of research. What can be done? How can we optimize it? Because it's very simple to make bioethanol from something, but it's very difficult to actually harvest that ethanol in a pure way. getting the azeotrope out, because alcohol you can only distill to technically 95% alcohol. The rest will be water because it forms azeotrope. So getting it in a pure enough form that you can actually use it as a fuel, that's still difficult. But this is where I would say the entire process of now just looking at distillation, it is an expensive process because there's a lot of heat that gets has to be input into a still to distill the ethanol or the biofuels or whatever. But this is where collaboration becomes very important. We have to start thinking of ways where which factories are producing a lot of heat that they want to get rid of, and then collaborate with them. Say if you've got, this is now maybe a stupid example, but if you've got a power plant that's got a massive steam stack next to it, before you run into the steam stack, run through a still and heat up the still and use that waste energy that you're trying to get rid of in any case. Try and use that in some productive manner in a different process that's completely different from what you're actually doing. But we have to start thinking of ways where we can collaborate and where we can get value from each other. Everybody wants to see themselves as islands, and what they do is what they do. They don't necessarily want to venture too far to the left field, but it is important that people start thinking of how can I actually use some of my waste, even if it's waste heat or waste cold, even for that matter. Some places need to heat up their processes. So that energy, that cooling in it, or that energy needs to come from somewhere. So we can use that in different processes. We just have to start thinking of ways how to actually do it in an efficient manner.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to thank all our speakers today. Absolutely fascinating hour and a half on this important topic. You kind of left a bit, what an enormous challenge. A third of the food is wasted. We've got 20% of our population hungry. But after all these talks, you just see opportunity really everywhere to feed people, to address climate change, to provide jobs and income generation. We've got an incredible food banking model with FoodForward SA that just needs to be more enabled through policy to help more signatories or partners join. We've got this incredible initiative through the CGCSA, where we've really set ourselves a target to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. So once that's, the ground has been laid, and I really appreciate the pragmatic approach to go voluntary so we can move quicker and start reporting so we can actually see that we're making progress and where we're not. Great to see 37 signatories already signed up. And then, of course, there's the science and the research that needs to happen into looking at valorisation. And Stefan was very clear in the challenges around that, but that actually we need to collaborate to find solutions. So thank you to all the speakers, and thank you to all of you for attending today. And I hope you have a super rest of your afternoon. Thank you.